Well, as many of you know, my name is Will Inboden. I'm the Executive Director of the Clements Center and a professor at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, a couple of your hosts for today, and honored to have so many of our students here in the audience, and we're going to be hearing from a few of those students in a little bit. Mr. Secretary, as you and I were visiting out back beforehand, we were remembering the first time we met was a couple of years ago, and at that time you were in the private sector, and I had given a foreign policy speech to a group of UT alums of whom you were in the audience, and as we recalled, you asked me some very probing questions in that after my lecture,
what goes around comes
that's
around.
Right. The tables have turned, sir. I don't think either of us expected 2 years later we'd be here on the one-year anniversary of being secretary. So anyway, so my turn to ask some questions. I'm going to ask the secretary a few questions. We'll have a colloquy here, and then we're going to hear from a few of our students as well. So, Mr. Secretary, I'm a historian by training, and whenever I'm looking at current foreign policy issues, I always like to think about the historical context. And as our history students here will know, in a few years we celebrate the 200th anniversary of the Monroe Doctrine, which for a very young United States was our assertion of our efforts to keep European colonial powers out of the Western Hemisphere, to protect our security, but also to promote the three pillars of the speech you talked about today: security, liberty, and prosperity. So you as secretary, you kind of inherit that 200-year tradition. Looking back, how would you regard the Monroe Doctrine? Has it been more of a success or a failure, especially as you look at our challenges today?
Well, I think it clearly has been a success because, as I mentioned at the top, what binds us together in this hemisphere are shared democratic values. And while different countries may express that democracy not precisely the same way we practice democracy in this country, the fundamentals of it, respect for the dignity of the human being, respect for the individual to pursue life, liberty, happiness, those elements do bind us together in this hemisphere. So I think it clearly was an important commitment at the time, and I think over the years that has all continued to frame the relationship. Having said that, it's easy for the United States as a country, because of our size and our engagements with so many countries and regions around the world, to, through nothing more than just perhaps a period of neglect, to let certain relationships atrophy a bit. And I think we've gone through those periods of time in our history as well. And if you look back, and whether you can go by individual country or regionally as well, due to other events, sometimes I think we have forgotten about the importance of the Monroe Doctrine and what it meant to this hemisphere and maintaining those shared values. So I think it's as relevant today as it was the day it was written.
Okay, cool. John Quincy Adams would be happy to hear that. So, you mentioned in your speech NAFTA and the ongoing renegotiations and efforts to bring it up to speed. And it was on the presidential campaign trail in 1980 that candidate Ronald Reagan was the first American political leader to call for a North American Free Trade Accord, which soon thereafter became NAFTA. So as you mentioned, we've been living with this vision and this reality for quite a while. As our country's in the midst of the NAFTA renegotiations, what would you describe as what have been the strengths and the weaknesses of NAFTA as currently constituted?
Well, I think, again, and as I mentioned, when it was put in place 30 years ago, the world was a bit of a different place. Supply chains didn't function the way they do today. Again, I mentioned the advent of the digital age, the digital economy, which has completely disrupted supply chains and how they function. The rise of China now as the second largest economy in the world, and China growing its economy by spreading out its own trading relationships. All of those have had an impact on NAFTA's ability to respond to the agreement. And that's why I think we think about it as a need to modernize the agreement. I think the strength of building upon the fact that with shared borders, there are clear efficiencies to be gained that serve all three countries well and creates more value. And that's in the global world of competition and trade, and whether you're building automobiles or whatever you're manufacturing or whatever you're doing agriculturally, you are competing with others. And when we can integrate the strengths of these three countries that share this border, if we can lower our cost of supply by that much, we just won. We just beat the other trading partners. And I think that was always the vision in the beginning. And I think where it's having trouble and struggling today is because it's not been able to respond to that outside competitive force as effectively as perhaps it should. So we're hoping we can get to a modernized agreement. I'm not directly engaged in those negotiations. I stay close to them because they do intersect with our foreign policy agenda as well. I can tell you these are tough negotiations, and I'm sure some of you are hearing about that. But the parties are continuing to work, I think, towards a solution that serves all three countries' interests well, but then collectively achieves this objective of collectively making us the most competitive trading entity in the world.
So, I want to come back to another country that you mentioned towards the end of your speech, and that's Cuba. One of the two remaining tyrannies in the region, along with Venezuela. And President Trump has been quite critical of the Obama administration's previous normalization process with Cuba, with the Castro regime. But as you mentioned in June, when the president announced some new regulations, or a few months ago in November, when he announced some new regulations, some Cuban American groups worried that those didn't go far enough in reversing the previous administration's policies. So, what would you say are your strategic priorities towards Cuba going forward?
Well, as I mentioned, they will be going through a transfer of power. Supposed to this year. We'll see whether it happens this year or not. But and this will be, in all likelihood, the first transfer of power that Cuba has not been led under a Castro regime. So that we think there are opportunities, perhaps, for an opportunity to shift towards a more open and democratic future. That's what we're hoping. With respect to our objectives with Cuba and I think President Trump's analysis, and I agree with it, of the terms with Cuba that were in place when we took office, that an awful lot had been given to the Cuban government and not much had been received in return, other than clear economic opportunity for U.S. business interests, which is great. But that was coming on the backs of the Cuban people, who are still very repressed. So we have taken a shift. We've preserved a lot of that, but basically said, yes, we do want to support the Cuban people. We're not interested in supporting the Cuban regime. And as you know, the government and the security forces and others have a significant presence in almost all economic activity. So one of our objectives was to separate that and allow the Cuban people to have a more full, rewarding participation in that economy and limit what the government is benefiting from through their ownership. So that was one of the significant changes. But again, it's all directed at how do we help the Cuban people. That's what we want to do, is help the Cuban people. And we're hopeful, and we do stay engaged with the Cuban authorities that in this transition, can they find their way to maybe a different future? I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Great. Well, as a professor, I could go on all day with more and more of my questions than that, but I think we'll all be a little more interested to hear from some of our students. So we've got a number of students with questions for you. Okay. And we've got microphones that are coming down the alleys. And all the rest of you, if you're not a student, sorry, no questions from you. All right, let's see. First one up, we've got Patricia Zavala. So, Patricia, where are you? So, that's right. There you go. Galen, the mic to Patricia. So. And please identify your degree program and school. That's right.
Hello, Secretary Tillerson. My name is Patricia Zavala. I'm a dual degree master's student at the LBJ School of Public Affairs and the Lozano Long Institute of Latin American Studies. And my question is about corruption in Latin America, which is something that you touched on in your speech. Given the effect that corruption has in undermining public institutions and impeding the effective implementation of the administration's policy priorities, what can the U.S. do to combat the endemic corruption in the region?
Well, I mentioned we have a number of initiatives and funding programs working directly with individual countries, the U.S. directly, but also using other UN and other international organizations to, first and foremost, strengthen the judicial systems. If we can get judicial systems and judges that are not corruptible, then you can begin to prosecute cases of corruption and punish people, and then that begins to dissuade them. And that's the approach. Now, that does then raise significant risk for those judges. So hand in glove with it goes strengthening law enforcement and security in the region and in those countries to protect those who are taking action to eradicate corruption. And there is, without question, there's an intersection of a lot of the trans-criminal organizations with the corruption as well to facilitate their narcotics activities, their human trafficking activities, other kind of illicit smuggling. So it's quite challenging, But we've made a lot of progress in Central America with these initiatives and in Mexico with the Merida initiative that I mentioned. Those are all specifically targeted at exactly the issue that you're asking about. But it is strengthening judicial systems, getting judges in place that will act in accordance with their law. In some cases, passing new prosecutorial laws that make it easier to prosecute corruption. A lot of these are evidentiary laws. If you don't have good evidentiary laws, you can't make the case for a prosecution. And then creating an environment where these judges can do their job, recognizing that some of them are going to come under threat. So it's very targeted, and we try to go country by country as to what is best needed there. But both in Mexico and in Latin America, it's a significant undertaking. That really is what's necessary to create the kind of environment then to allow economic prosperity, growth, job creation. That's what keeps everybody at home.
Thanks. All right, and our next question is from Juan Gonzalez Rivera.
Hello, Mr. Secretary of State. My question is, first, I'm a Fulbright student from Colombia. I'm candidate for PhD in chemical engineering. So my question is about...
Future ExxonMobil.
my question is about your science...
Or future State Department.
That's right.
About your science diplomacy agenda. So in your upcoming travel to Latin America, will there be a science strategic agenda to foster scientific cooperation in topics of interest to the region or other topics of interest to the region, such as food security, infectious diseases, and, of course, the environment?
Well, I think, as you pointed, you just touched on areas that are obvious for cooperation and scientific investigation, and certainly South America in particular has some incredibly rich ecology areas, things that we can learn a lot about what's happening with the environment, what's happening with the planet, what is the effect of climate change that we're seeing. And so, yes, there are important joint scientific efforts for us to fund, send our own scientists there, but also bring scientists from Latin and South America to our institutions in the United States, and like yourself, to study and share, grow, and either go back home to continue that work or stay here. So there are environmental issues of interest. There are diseases that are of particular interest in certain environments in particular, and that's why we have a very active PEPFAR program. As you know, it's AIDS, but it's also malaria and a few other infectious diseases that are important. So it is an opportunity for us to talk about how are those collaborations that are in place going, what could we do to either strengthen those or expand them, and what new areas of investigation might be of interest to both of us. Certainly the strong educational ties between our two countries, and the fact that you're here studying in the University of Texas, and congratulations on being a Fulbright scholar. Those are the strong connections that down the road, and these are the people-to-people connections, they're going to keep our countries very, very close together in terms of our values as well. And all the best to you.
Okay, another student question. We've got Sean Salome there. The microphone's coming down. And Mr. Secretary, Sean, he's about to ask you the question. He's one of our Clements Center undergraduates. He'll tell you what he's studying, but he's also a Marine vet who did a couple of deployments in Colombia.
God bless you.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Secretary. Thank you for having us. Colombia is facing crossroads right now. Its neighbor to the east, Venezuela, is deteriorating as its continued government is strangulating the people. We're having mass migration of Venezuelans into Colombia. Internally, Colombia's government and the ELN have failed peace talks, and these issues may very well lead to social unrest and economic turmoil for Colombians. How does this U.S. plan, or U.S. aid, plan on aiding the Colombian people, and should the FARC be part of this process? Thank you.
Well, as you know, they have a very prescribed process to work through the implementation of the peace accord. And I would share your observation that it has stalled a bit. They were making good progress, and now some areas that are important seem to have hit a pause. That's one of the areas we will be talking with the Santos government about. How can we get those restarted? continue the we think it's important to continue to implement the peace accord if we're going to secure the peace that has been negotiated with the FARC-FLN. You are correct in terms of Colombia is probably the most impacted country from the Venezuelan crisis. Something between 200 and 300,000 Venezuelans have now left Venezuela, living in Colombia as refugees basically, but another couple of 100,000 that are going back and forth all the time just seeking food and medical treatment in particular. We have attempted to provide certain medical equipment, vaccines, and others to the Venezuelan government so these people don't have to leave to get their treatments. The Venezuelan government refuses to take that aid. Maduro does not want to appear that he needs it. We're going to continue to work at that. So it's a real problem for Colombia, and it has the potential to destabilize Colombia, which is why continuing to move forward on the peace implementation is so important, so it doesn't create a new area of instability and all the parties go back to their corners and we're right where we were. We have a lot of confidence in the Santos government, and we know they have elections coming up, but we believe the government is very committed to following through on implementing the peace accord. We need to encourage them and help where we can in that regard. The problem with the coca production is it's a significant problem. It's a problem to us. It's a shared problem. As I said in my remarks, we don't like to admit it, but we're the market. The United States accounts for the vast, vast, vast majority of illicit drug consumption in the world. And until we address that problem at home, it's a bit awkward to hold them solely accountable for being the supplier. So that's why we're working through these integrated dialogues to put the whole supply chain together. Let's own the consumption problem. We have to own that. They need to own the supply side. So in Colombia, we've got a lot of issues to deal with, but we also think Colombia is an enormous country of opportunity, and they have everything they need to be wildly successful. And we believe they can be and they will be, and we just need to support them and encourage them to get on with implementing the peace accords. But thank you for the question.
All right, and then next question is from Allison. Allison, that's right, yeah. The mic's going to you. Remember, please identify your degree program. Thanks.
Hi, Secretary Tillerson. Thanks so much for taking our questions. My name is Allison Swadek. I'm a second-year Master of Public Affairs student at the LBJ School of Public Affairs. My question is about the Merida Initiative, the security partnership between the U.S. and Mexico that you alluded to in your speech. You mentioned the importance of rule of law and fighting organized crime. Congress appropriated $2.8 billion to the Merida Initiative in 2008, but there's $1 billion left to spend. How do you think the U.S. should best spend that money in order to promote security for both nations?
Well, in order to spend the money, we also need the cooperation with the Mexican government of where do they agree we can help them the most. So oftentimes the pace of that is coming to agreement with them on where they are willing, and we can work with them. We continue to believe that we can provide them significant training in law enforcement because they need more law enforcement personnel, training of people to build their forces up, and new kinds of training to deal with the cartels in particular. Regrettably, the cartels have become more powerful. They are extremely well armed. Most of those arms are coming from the United States. So we have a huge weapons interdiction effort underway as well. This is why we have Department of Homeland Security involved. Interestingly, for about every 10 trucks that we inspect coming north, because we're worried about what's coming to see us, we only inspect one truck going south. And so we have committed to them that we will do a better job of interdicting weapons flowing in. So I think it is through this joint dialogue we're having with them to identify, looking at what are all elements of this supply chain, where can we best attack that, what are the capabilities we need, and then we have some funds to address that. So it is going to be, I think, law enforcement, some ability for them to collect intelligence themselves on where these labs are. We destroyed, I think, about 134 labs last year through some information sharing, and when we identify them, the Mexican forces have been going in to destroy those. So I think we have we've got, unfortunately, too many opportunities where we can apply the joint effort, and we have the resources, the money to do that. Thank you.
All right. Another student question. Let's see, Evan.
Secretary Tillerson, thank you very much. My name is Evan McCormick. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Clements Center. During the political crisis in Venezuela last year, the State Department vocally backed the Organization for American States' criticisms of the Venezuelan electoral system. In December, however, the State Department recognized the re-election of Honduran President Juan Orlando Hernandez in spite of similar criticisms from the OAS regarding electoral irregularities and calling for or recommending a new election. My question is, what is the Trump administration's policy regarding support for free and fair democratic elections in the Americas, and will it work with the OAS in ensuring that those democratic standards are respected equally across the hemisphere?
Well, our position's the same in every country, and in the case of the Honduran elections, we also looked at other organizations' assessment of the election in terms of was it conducted in a free and fair way, was the election legitimate. In terms of why the OAS came to a different conclusion, which was actually different than the original conclusion they came to, they changed their position. I'd refer you to the OAS to ask them. But we did look at the circumstances of the election. We concluded it was conducted fairly, and I think there's no, and I want to be clear here, there can be no comparison between the election process that was conducted in Honduras and the election process that's going on in Venezuela. They're nowhere close to one another.
Right.
Thank you for the question, though.
Okay, and let's see, one more student question. Let's do Abigail. Okay. Right there, Diana. Yeah.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, and thank you for spending part of your day with us. My name is Abigail Griffin, and I'm a senior studying Plan 2 Honors Government and Middle Eastern Languages and Cultures. I have a question regarding Venezuela. So a commonly proposed solution to a lot of the problems in the country is the removal of President Maduro from power. In your opinion, is this removal necessary, and what could the U.S.'s role be in the possible regime change, especially considering the turmoil that could surmount from such a change?
Well, President Maduro could choose to just leave. I mean, that'd be the easiest. We have not advocated for regime change or removal of President Maduro. Rather, we have advocated that they return to the Constitution. We do not recognize the Constituent Assembly as legitimate, and they need to get back to the Constitution and follow the Constitution. I think there will be a change. We want it to be a peaceful change. Peaceful transitions, peaceful regime change is always, better than the alternative, a violent change. In the history of Venezuela and in fact the history in other Latin American, South American countries, oftentimes it's the military that handles that. That when things are so bad that the military leadership realizes they can't serve the citizens anymore, they will manage a peaceful transition. Whether that will be the case here or not, I do not know. Again, our position is Maduro should get back to his Constitution and follow it. And then if he is not reelected by the people, so be it. And if the kitchen gets a little too hot for him, I'm sure that he's got some friends over in Cuba that can give him a nice hacienda on the beach, and he can have a nice life over there.
All right. Well, our time is drawing to the close, and I know the Secretary needs to head off on the next leg of his very ambitious journey here. But, Mr. Secretary, one final question from the moderator here. As a native Texan, you know here in Texas we have very strong concerns about border security. And I can speak for almost everyone here in the room that when we look at our state's borders, especially us UT folks, our biggest concern is the threat from Oklahoma. Especially the Sooners football team. So you've got a captive audience. What advice do you have for Coach Herman, and what are we going to do to beat OU this fall? That's right, yeah.
Well, I think I can help him.
Okay.
We just need to get in place a visa program for the Red River. and we just won't issue any visas to the Oklahoma football team.
Well done. Thank you.
I'm really not worried. because University of Texas is going to beat Oklahoma this year. So.
That's right, amen. There's tomorrow's headline. All right, okay. All right, that's right. Hook 'em in. All right, everybody, please join me in welcoming. Thank you. All right, thank you so much, sir. That was awesome. And everybody, before you leave, we've got a little send-off for you from the secretary's old bandmates, his old friends. So stay with us for a couple minutes. Can't leave without a song. So that's right. So. Yeah, well done. Thanks so much, Greg. That was fantastic. That's right. Thanks.